First of all, I'd like to introduce François Bujon de Latang. He was president of the FBE International Consultants, an old friend from Washington, and a distinguished viewer of the American scene. François.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Jim. Thank you for this introduction. Is this thing working? Yes, it is. Good. I'm very intimidated with the duty to start on such a distinguished panel. Everybody has heard about everything possible about Mr. Trump. But before I give you a few impressions from Europe on this election, I'd like to come back briefly to Trump's election and to give a few thoughts on what made it possible. The first thing I think we should dwell on is that it was, of course, Trump's victory, but it was also Hillary's defeat. And I think there are lessons to be drawn from that. Trump's victory, of course, Trump approached the campaign and the election as a complete political outsider, and he led a campaign against, really, political correctness, against Washington, against the establishment, against the political class as we know it. His campaign was built on the anger and frustration in the American electorate that was felt mostly by what we call the angry white men. People cast aside by globalization, sometimes having lost many things, even sometimes their home in the 2008, 2009 crisis, the neglected white electorate, contrary to Hillary, who tried to cater to the three categories of voters who had elected Obama in 2008 and re-elected him in 2012, the young people, the women, and the minorities. Trump ignored these three categories and campaigned really to a different set of the electorate who usually are not voting, but whom he was able to channel and mobilize with methods from reality TV, of which he was a star, more than of a typical political campaigner or orator. But that's Trump. Hillary, on the other side, brought with her a feeling of déjà vu and suffered from the Clinton fatigue that has affected the American electorate. She was the incarnation of everything that Trump and his voters were rejecting. She led a relatively poor campaign, probably weaker than in 2008, and she was not an ideal candidate. She might have been a good president, but she was not a very good candidate, honestly. She lost the Electoral College, which normally she shouldn't have lost, because if you have the total of delegates from the states that voted consistently for the Democratic Party for the last 6 elections, she had 242 such candidates that she could count on. She could have won 1 or 2 swing states and been elected. She didn't win one of the big swing states, and she lost several of the key consistently Democratic states like Pennsylvania, for instance, or Michigan. And I think the most impressive figure about her defeat is that she commanded 10 million less votes than Obama in 2008. 10 million less. That election leaves many, many questions unanswered. Many questions about Trump himself. What kind of a president will he be? We know what kind of a candidate he has been, but a few things have indicated that he might try to be a different president than a candidate. We can leave him the benefit of the doubt for a few weeks at least. But there are many, many concerns. First, the arch-conservative followers that he has, some of them already appointed to key positions, the role that his family will play, and his character, who is certainly difficult to deal with. So that's about Trump himself. About the divided Republican Party, we also have a number of unanswered questions. The Republican Party was sort of hijacked by Donald Trump. A number of its leaders really didn't support him. And if you think about it, many of the slogans on which he campaigned ran directly contrary to the typical Republican doxa. So what kind of real following will he have in Congress with a Republican Party that is so heavily divided remains a mystery and might hamper his action. Many questions also about a deeply divided America that really was the background of this election. It is not new, but it is increasing. The divisions are many, and I cannot even list them. The problem of social cohesion, obviously, is a major problem in America. We've seen this through the Trump campaign. We have a deep division between the conservative right that is really calling the shots and more moderate Republicans, and of course, we would say centrists in Europe. Hillary got 1 million more voters in the popular vote than Trump, so he was not at all elected by a landslide. It is a clean victory, but a narrow one in terms of voters, and it shows a deeply divided American society. It was as Washington against the rest, and if you look at the electoral map, you see that the whole American continent is red with the exception of the two coasts that remain blue. So these are all clear indications of deep divisions. That's for the election itself. Now, if we turn to Europe and how Europe feels and how it considers the perspectives of a Trump presidential term, I would then switch to French because I think I can speak in English about things American, but about things European, I prefer to express myself in my own language. La victoire de M. Trump a été évidemment une complète surprise en Europe et un coup de tonnerre. Une complète surprise, c'est normal parce que les sondages ne le laissaient pas.
لا شك, undoubtedly, the election of Donald Trump was a big shock to a large part of the American people and the world as a whole, and it led to the adoption of quite different measures, especially that Europeans were not only relying on the victory of Hillary Clinton, but were hoping to see it translated to reality because she is well familiarized with Europe and the state of international relations in the world. So they trust her much more than Donald Trump. Additionally, they didn't have sufficient confidence in the Obama administration, and they thus thought that with the advent of Hillary Clinton, the status of Europe at the international scene would be reclaimed. So it is safe to say that the election of Donald Trump was a major surprise, and it wasn't acceptable for many Europeans. We all know the stakes that are currently existent in the European Union, especially with the stagnant economic growth, the high level of unemployment. Not to mention the Brexit, which has had consequences on regional relations and raised several questions while highlighting the vulnerability of the European Constitution, since this is the first time that a state elects to exit the European Union. These are the reasons that made Europeans uncomfortable and uneasy with the election of Donald Trump. However, there are other transatlantic reasons. Europeans were not confident in the Obama administration. Undoubtedly, in the beginning, he received large support, being the first black president of the United States. However, he is the first U.S. president to not be directly connected to Europe because he was raised in Hawaii. He is the son of a Kenyan man. At the same time, he tried to be a part of European relations with the world as a whole. Europeans were uneasy with some of his decisions with regards to in the field of international relations, and it is worth adding that the situation in the transatlantic region was not completely stable because there were differences on the partnership, and many questions were raised after certain American institutions expressed their will, including the American Congress. However, the election of Donald Trump raised concerns and fears in Europe with regards to his foreign policy. This remains a big unknown, and everyone is worried about it. There are also fears about the macroeconomic measures that he will adopt in case Europe begins to invest in public infrastructure in the United States of America and pays large sums of money. This can lead to extreme inflation, and when we talk about inflation, we talk about higher interests. In several states, you cannot talk about inflation separately from unemployment. There is also the risk faced by free trade with Europe, especially that Donald Trump campaigned strongly against TPP, or the Trans-Pacific Partnership. So there are questions about the foreign economic policy that he will adopt. Will it be isolationist or not? This raises several questions and concerns. There was also talk about Trump refusing the concept or the validity of climate change. And in Europe and France in particular, this is a very sensitive and important topic. He also mentioned NATO and his desire to reduce its mandate or prerogatives, which has led to a state of fear among many segments of the European society, since American President Donald J. Trump might eliminate Article 5 and improve the United States' relations with Russia. Will he be able to make a deal with the Russian president at the expense of Europeans? To what ends will he go in order to dismantle this alliance? There are many fears arising from this subject. At the same time, we see the most recent incarnation of populism. This is a term that I don't like because it does not hold deep meanings. However, it represents everything that stands against globalization, free trade. It thus responds to the fears and worries of voters. For that, the election of Donald J. Trump is an encouragement to all populist movements that have gained traction in Europe. This can have several adverse effects that can sometimes be hard to define. However, we will be able to measure them as we go. Every time we see new developments in the upcoming year. December 4th, Austrian presidential elections will be held, and it is probable that a far-right candidate will be elected as president. Additionally, there will be parliamentary elections in the Netherlands. The populist movement there is also gaining traction and has high chances of winning. Additionally, the French presidential elections will be taking place in May, as well as parliamentary elections in October in Germany. So it is safe to say that this is quite the eventful year where we might witness a strong rise in populist movements, especially with the exit of the United Kingdom from Europe, also known as Brexit. Subsequently, Europeans might find themselves in a situation of great unknowns, and it is necessary for all Europeans and the world as a whole to unite. The first time they truly sensed fear was was when the first meeting was held without British representatives. A high-level meeting was held last week in Berlin, and leaders were discussing the importance of unity based on democratic standards and values, especially that the European has given several lessons in this field. However, there are many concerns and fears related to Brexit and the consequences that might ensue. For that, it is necessary to work on improving solidarity in the Euro region while promoting the tenets of unity, especially in the framework of the Schengen Agreement. These countries must work towards promoting security because, based on the statements of Donald Trump, he wants to see allies, the United States allies, improve their security without relying on their assistance. For that, these countries must double their efforts in this context while finding common ground with the United Kingdom during Brexit negotiations. So it is safe to say that Europeans are worried and really didn't need another headache, which is Brexit, because the election of President Trump constitutes several additional obstacles that they must face.
What have these elections done to the image of America? And you've answered it very, very well. And I'd like the other panelists to also try to address that question as we go forward about what have these elections done to the image of the United States and what are the consequences